Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're coming into our last webcast of the year. We've done 24 of these, Andrew. It's crazy. Um, this one's themed Futureproofing 2025, and because it's such a seminal event, last event of the year, we've got an action-packed list of 12 different speakers that are going to speak about the future with a kind of a 3 to 5 year purview. And so we're really excited. We've got an international panel from, I think, 5 or 6 different countries, and all of them have a different sliver or facet of the future. And we'll introduce them as we go. And each one of them we have tasked with the notion of 3 different questions. What is the wrap up for this crazy pandemic year that we've just gone through? What are some of the signals from the future, both major and surprising? And what's a breakthrough future proofing idea? Because we want to own the future. That's what we are here at Future Proofing. We just don't have it roll over us. We'd like to tackle it and actually start working on those early signals now before other people do. Andrea, any of the other context for setting us up today? Because we got to get right into our speakers today.
We're going to get right into it, but we always want to thank the future proofing community, also from all over the globe. We've got some great people that we've known before and some new faces in our community. So super excited. And no, let's just get right into it.
Educate or have a much stronger focus on education to manage the integration of technology, AI, and so forth. But there's also a much stronger need to focus on education and science and fact-based arguments, fact-based arguments in general discourse. So why not look at that? So
that's been really interesting. I can't believe your summary didn't include the bling wearing party dresses to work, which sounds like such a deep human need. So what else is our pent-up demand? So that's so interesting. And it's frustrating to have to move from person to person because each of these topics is so interesting. But we're gonna move on to Lou Pugliese, who will talk about, well, first of all, Lou, introduce yourself and then give us your perspectives on the headline, the signs from the future and the future proofing ideas.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for having me today. My background is 25 plus years in 3 different sectors of the education market. As an entrepreneur, raising capital, building new technology-enabled businesses from startups to IPOs within capital markets, and actually supplying capital to the education market, and new innovation in the education market, and trying to develop new technologies at scale. And then lastly, in the area of actually being in the belly of the beast at a university and university administration, and the development and implementation of technologies that change teaching and learning, focused in particular in research, testing, and measurement of student learning science, and what it takes to make students successful and engaged. And a lot of today's discussion has been sort of the underlying tone in this area. A lot of discussion has been around ethics and the pandemic impact and the business of the role of consumers and the impact on consumers and the role that technology can play. And so my question here really is what role does education and reskilling play in economic recovery and in the environment that we're currently in, and what's the landscape look like for the necessary skill development and workforce advancement to accommodate this and support this recovery. And so the headlines for me is, look, for the knowledge economy, this is a historic, unprecedented economic crisis, and it's going to have significant cascading impact. But I also think it's going to have a significant amount of opportunity that's going to emerge. And look, let's be real. This pandemic is going to drive 85 to 150 million people worldwide. It's going to drive them back into extreme poverty. And this is a big consequence of the pandemic, that we're going to now have to reshape the way we reskill, how universities now have a new mandate to reshape their institutional mission towards, what is now this sort of 60-year degree. It's not a stop and a start. It's not, primary education, secondary education, workforce. It's now a continuum in how we have to reshape how we teach and how we learn toward a 60-year degree. And, look, this is a perennial challenge in our education systems globally, and it's now hitting full force, and the speed of change is going to create a lot of winners and losers. So we need to figure out how we do these things differently. And so, this is sort of inevitable. I mean, a lot of people talk about this being an accelerant to the change, and this is something that we had to do within our education systems for a long time. Higher education has been a vitamin. It's not necessarily been a painkiller to skilled workforce who desperately need to drive the economy forward and get into this economic recovery. Scott Galloway calls this a great reckoning. We spend $50,000 a year, get 90 plus points of margin, to create education, and no product in the world, not even Tesla or Ferrari, has that sort of extraordinary margin. And so we have to look at how we take several $100,000s of household debt and turn that into something that's going to be an economic development opportunity and turnaround, providing the necessary skills for future workers and existing workers to be able to succeed in the environment in a way that impacts economic development. And so, we have to take a really good look at how we refactor. Obviously in this pandemic, stock market analysts look at companies with cash on their balance sheet as those that are going to be sustainable for the future. Well, that's not a big describer of how we do education. We have about $120 billion of lost income that we're going to have to figure out how to remedy over time, and that's going to have to come with upskilling, reskilling, and so we really need to look at this notion of how education plays a role in the balancing of this sort of equilibrium between the supply of education in terms of institutions and other suppliers and how we educate up, and then from an employer down perspective, how we drive the type of skills necessary to be able to succeed in your role that links to a business's strategic objectives that drives economic development. And so I think we're going to see a lot of great change coming in the design and delivery of how we supply education, how education is delivered to whom and by whom. And I think there's going to be a greater emphasis on post-secondary education as a fuel for economic growth, but also a lot of alternative types of education supply, design, and development that are going to challenge our traditional institutions, that are going to really fuel the economy in terms of the upskilling, outskilling, that's required at institutions. And so, that's kind of the big headline for 2020, at least in the knowledge economy industry that I play in.
Well, there's so much more to talk about. One of our core future-proofing concepts is perpetual refresh. And so we'll probably do a 2021. We'd like to keep you in the wings for a 2021 deeper dive on perpetual refresh and the 60-year degree. Super important. Thank you, Lou. And we have to move on to Michael Young. You're going to pull it all together, go last. And Michael, I'll let you introduce yourself as well. And at the end, we'll try to do a very quick round the horn. So Michael.
Thank you. And thanks to my panelists. I too have taken a ton of notes and really excited about what's been talked about. I'm Michael Young. I'm the founder and CEO of Actual Agency. We are a San Francisco-based communications advisory firm. We focus on executive thought leadership and corporate communications and the intersection of advanced technology and how that, coupled with innovative thinking, is disrupting industry. And, I thinking about the headline for 2020, and a lot of, many of the panelists ahead of me have really touched on this, this word, but I would frame it around resilience based on purpose-driven leadership, and where crisis reveals character. In some cases, we saw that what was revealed is a lack of character. And then in other cases, a tremendous amount of principle-driven leadership that allowed some to not only survive what we've been going through, but to thrive in the face of it. And a lot of that is about putting principles and people first. And I would say, living in the bubble of Silicon Valley for the past 15 or 20 years, I think it has, been punctured by the pandemic, and I think it's given us an opportunity, at least from the clients that I'm working with and the people that I'm talking to look really broad, to really broaden our horizons and to look for other examples. I've spent this year on my own podcast talking about corporate purpose and stakeholder capitalism, and really just focusing in on what that means. And in terms of, what's the future trend, it's that stakeholderism is not a nice to have, it's a must have. It's here to stay. And customers, employees, and stakeholders, they want action. They don't want words. And what I've been talking to clients and leaders about is this collapse between the say-do ratio. And there's a tremendous amount of transparency, and organizations are going to be judged not on what they say, but what they do. And so this coherence between statement and action has to be real. But the trade-off, there are real trade-offs when you think about the tension between how do we manage sustainability and profit. That is a real thing. So that is really going to be the trend of, I think, of 2021 and beyond, that stakeholder perspectives are going to be front and center, but that purpose and that perspective does drive growth. You see consumers making choices. You see employer of choice being driven by what kind of organization is this at the core? Do new college grads, to the extent that they can find jobs, where do they want to work? Do they want to work for some godless profit-driven entity, or do they want to work for an organization that they're proud of? And that at some level, environmental stewardship does reduce costs. It's not just well, we have to do this in addition to, and it's going to increase our costs. And that purpose really does activate inside out employee energy. It drives innovation, and that it can have a profound impact on the balance sheet and on the risk profile of the organization. And one of the first guests I had was a good friend who works in the board advisory practice at Russell Reynolds, and he was that was my January, which feels like a lifetime ago. My first episode. He's an old friend, an old colleague, and starting a podcast, I just went out to who I know and asked. And he talked about cognitive diversity at the board level in, sort of in January. And that was like, really interesting. And then kabang, 2020 happens. And, this idea of diversity and the say-do ratio. And we really started to unpack ESG this year. And I think, and I'm really grateful to hear from, European colleagues, because European companies have been so far ahead in ESG in terms of reporting and thinking about that for a long time. And if you look at the league tables of the most purpose-driven sustainable companies, and in a large measure, they are European. Our Danish colleagues, Ørsted tops if I'm saying that correct, Ørsted tops the league table in terms of not only sustainability, but also corporate performance. And I think that's how it should be looked at, is that sustainability isn't stuff for the ESG report or the annual report, but that financial performance and sustainable performance are the same. And that I believe organizations will fundamentally be driven by how they treat employees, customers, how they respond to society, and how they treat their broader responsibilities under the banner of stakeholderism. And I think leaders are going to be judged on whether or not they've got a handle on this, or they've lost the plot, and in some instances they will be punished significantly by the market, by capital allocation, by talent acquisition, by customer preference, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So fantastic discussion. Thank you all, and really grateful to be here. Thank you.
Michael, great way to play the role of anchorman. I like your overall message in terms of purpose, because I think for a lot of us, we found a bit of purpose in 2020. My hope is the rubber band doesn't snap back or try to snap back to where we were in 2019. I think we're all, believers in progress. A few things. We're at the top of the hour, so we were going to do this around the horn at the end. Maybe what I could ask my panelists and even attendees if they could do a one-liner that sums up how you're looking at 2021. Put it in the chat. We will orientate and craft that and curate that for everybody who listens to this afterwards. So just a one-liner there. I'll do a bit of housekeeping and then a wrap up here. 4 things from a future-proofing standpoint. Myself and Andrea are in the debating throes of what the next 27 webcasts look like for 2021. So we'll come back. I think we've made a pitch early on, Michael, to, I think it was Michael, perpetual refresh, or maybe that was Lou, sorry. I'm sure all of you may be back again. Secondly, we have our research effort that's beginning, our quarterly research effort called the Customer Zeitgeist. So if you're really into customer in the future, please get in touch with us, because we are pulling together a global league of people to look seriously at what the future of the customer is. We are launching the Futureproofing Awards in January. And probably what we've spent the most time on is future-proofing you. We're going to take all of the learnings and lessons from these webcasts, from our book, and from our venture, and putting them into a training curriculum starting February 26th. So that's the housekeeping. I do want to thank all of our panelists yet again. I wrote about 40 things down in our discussion today, so I'm sure I've given that short shrift upon further listening to this. I want to thank you guys. I also want to thank just the 80 panelists that have appeared on Futureproofing now over the course of the year. It's just an amazing group of people that have come together, somewhat based out of passion, somewhat based out of a pedigree of really deep experience in something, and somewhat out of needing to commune with others. So I want to thank you. I want to kick 2020 to the curb right now. I'd like to be done with it. Hopefully we'll learn some of the lessons from it. Let's hopefully make 2021 bigger. Let's make it bolder. Let's make it, badass and simpler. And I guess I'll close out unless you have anything else to add, Andrea.
No, I'm really liking the fact, excuse me, I'm really liking the fact that people are weighing in on the chat. So take another moment before we have to close out to write your final thoughts. And I do feel a little bit emotional about this year. I was feeling a little bit depressed before the webcast, but actually I'm feeling better. First of all, connecting with people is always the answer. And second of all, the optimism and the rationalism that people brought today. I have so much to think about to go into the new year.
Well, I thought as people are putting their last in our last seconds, putting their lines in there, there's a line by Elizabeth Scott that I thought to myself at the start of this pandemic. I'm still thinking about it now, and it's all about resilience. We've talked about agility and connection, and we talked about so much stuff, but I think there's a reinforcing point about trying to make it to the other side. And the sun will rise tomorrow. It always does. And I think maybe that's a good way to leave 2020 and future-proofing now. Once again, thank you, your panelists. Thank you, Andrea, my co-host. And for all that have listened and will be listening to this, we'll see you in the future. Bye now.